We are still in the series of contract management, everything contracts. This is good for buyers, for suppliers, for those consultants that are working on contracts. This is the time for you to get yourself knowledge, and to share with other people. As I said before, that as procurement, we get involved into the drafting of the contract, the reviewing of the contract agreement, be it supplier paper or our paper to back to suppliers, and in response, we get involved a lot, and also making sure that we sign and we maintain and manage the contract. So these are the things that I'd like us to avoid, that causes problems when we're dealing with contracts and or storing or managing contract management, right? Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back again to Procurement with myself, Lerato. This channel, we talk all things procurement. Let's start from the beginning. Let's go to the genesis of the entire thing. Okay, firstly, avoid verbal agreements. It goes without saying, this message is so much for my SMMEs and EMEs. Avoid getting into verbal agreements. I've seen and been in situations where we had to be involved, as procurement and legal, in some litigation that was caused because of a verbal agreement. People in meetings agree to things that is not written, and the supplier walks away with a particular understanding, and now causes problems when there has to be implementation, payments, and expectations. Please, you don't want to get yourself right there, okay? Do not agree to anything that is verbal, that is not written, especially when dealing with purchase agreements. Remember, I did say that this is a contract that solidifies the relationship between the buyer and the supplier, and we must have something in writing, right? All right, the second one is tacit agreement. Can we avoid, the nature of giving business to suppliers without having a valid contract in place? Because there has been, a history of payment, invoices and purchase orders issued that is regarded as a tacit agreement. And in the tacit agreement, if you decide to terminate the supplier maybe contract, services contract, and you tell them, listen, we don't need your services anymore, unfortunately find someone else, here's a 1-day notice, the supplier can take you on. And by virtue of historical supply and invoicing, you've already created some tacit agreement. Can we get into the culture of going into our spend analysis and our contract management repository and checking that, which one doesn't have a contract here that we consistently and religiously pay without having a contract, because tomorrow that can work against you. The third thing to avoid during contract drafting is to lose version control. Can we have a way of maintaining version control, guys? This is quite important, because sometimes if you are drafting a contract that is not in track mode, not red line, and the supplier takes it, sends it back, no red line, how are you going to see where the change is made? Sometimes you find that there is a unilateral mistake, and sometimes it's a common mistake, sometimes it's not. So avoid getting yourself in places where you miss the point of doing version control, because that can get you into trouble. And once you have received back that contract, please do comparison. There are some applications and good software that help you with doing, like by like comparison to see where are things change. Just also as a quality control. You're gonna thank me later. Another thing to avoid, once you have drafted this wonderful contract that almost got you a gray hair, and you've negotiated a really great deal for your business and for your company, and then people don't sign contracts. There's also that bad habit of suppliers or even the business not signing. In fact, in most cases, it's the organization that don't sign. Yeah, most organizations, guys, they don't sign contracts. I don't know why. The user signs one page, doesn't sign the other page, and or the supplier just signs. There's only one signatory in that contract. Listen, this causes issues when there is litigation or there's any matter to deal with, right? Because the contract was drafted but people did not sign. Or sometimes having unauthorized signatories. Someone does not have a delegation of authority to sign. Someone is not appointed by that company to have the authority to sign on behalf of business. Why are we having wrong people sign the contract? Because that also can work against you as a buyer or even a supplier, and these are the things that you need to avoid. Yes. The other mistake that we need to avoid is not defining each and every term in the contract. You know that a good contract comprises of, definitions from the beginning, after the recitals and the entities there, the definitions. You do find language that is used as the contract, goes on and we read. There is introduction of new terms Maybe there's introduction of a freelancer, for example, or a consultant that was not even defined in the definitions, and or particular type of service. Like, who's who there? Because you don't want to miss who's doing what responsibility. It needs to flow. If you're a service provider and a client, let it be so. You can't have a service provider, a client, a company, a stakeholder, and then you don't know who's playing what role there. If it's not defined, cut. Another thing to avoid is not having an audit review at the end of the contract. And this speaks to risk assessment, or risk compliance or compliance to the contract. It depends what really your organization calls it. But what then that does and what it helps is, if there's any mistake, guys, I've been involved in contracts that, were done correctly, but at the end, whoever had the last version, some way, they made a mistake, deleted a zero in a contract. Instead of it being, 100,000 is now 10,000. Instead of it being 100 or 1 million, it's now 100,000. You know what I mean? So those mistakes happen. So if audit gets involved at the end, or your risk assessment is done, someone needs to review and ensure that everything else that is written there is what was intended for. Then there's no issue, right? But there's someone that can pick up these small mistakes that tomorrow might be such a material change, and now you have to find yourself in some unilateral or lateral mistakes, and you have to deal with these courts, you have to deal with issues. Let's avoid those type of mistakes and get your contract to be assessed. The other mistake that we need to avoid is not defining the KPIs, not defining the service level, and not indicating what will be the penalties if you don't deliver. Please just avoid those mistakes when you're drafting contracts, because if you do not indicate what is required, the expectation, what is the success factor, how do I need you to deliver by when, how am I going to manage your performance? If I don't define that as a procurement professional, I'm doomed. And this is the mistake you want to avoid. Every contract must have a success factor, my KPI, somehow the SLA that you're expecting, and what is the repercussion if it's not met. Don't let it be silent and be so quiet that it just has nothing. We must hold each other accountable, and that's just part of the game. Another thing, of course, guys, to avoid is storing contracts in multiple share drives and locations, and no one knows. Or even, saving your contract in a C drive. I mean, it's easy for me if I'm working on a contract, I'm gonna, save on my C drive, but once it's been signed, I need to save it in the contract repository. Wherever your contract repository is at, save it there. Sometimes I save one signed version on my repository, and then when the full contract is signed, it's now saved my C drive, and now tomorrow audit comes, no one knows where to find the right version where. Let's avoid these things. Do not, save contracts in wrong places. Basically, one repository, just one. The other mistake, guys, to avoid is having an auto-renew clause in your contracts. Can we just deal with that? How do you have an auto-renew clause? And this is quite common in most of the master service agreements. Sometimes some services agreements, this is what we create then the nature of having evergreen contracts. Ngoba people did not take time to read the contract, and change them. There are services that really need evergreen. Maybe there are services that really need auto renewal, but some of them, they don't need auto renewal. That's why you need to check and make sure this particular product or this particular service that I've sourced and the supplier is providing, is it fit for purpose for auto renewal? And if not, delete. Control Alt Delete. You don't need that. So these are the mistakes. And then tomorrow you didn't budget for that, a project, or you didn't budget for that particular service, and now the contract is auto renew. What are you gonna do? You already have a commitment. You must just now fulfill the commitment. See what I mean? And put business under pressure as procurement, because sometimes we just don't check these things. So these are mistakes to avoid, guys. Let's not make these mistakes. All right, last thing to avoid. I do need to include this one. I know I might just cause me problems and make me unpopular, but can we avoid exploiting suppliers, making the contract so one way that is not even empowering the other party to want to be interested? Do you know how traumatic it is, or daunting, in fact, when you are reviewing a contract as a supplier and responding to a client because you're excited about the purchase order, right? And everything there, it's like there's no accountability, there's no two-way, there's no shared risk. Everything is you. listen, there's also termination clauses that I've read. The supplier can only terminate. You are not allowed to terminate if you do not do 1, 2, and 3. So, it's not empowering. Can we create empowering contracts? So we need to avoid, drafting terms that are so favorable, and bargaining to one-sided, where else it doesn't favor the other party. I mean, it's a fair game. If you need my services, whatever happens to my service after delivered to you, you need to bear some level of risk, right? Limitation of liability is a big problem, and I think, next season or next series we'll talk a lot more around these important clauses. But for now, let's end it here in terms of the things to avoid when we are drafting and involved in the contract management process, because these are the mistakes that can be costly to the business, right? These are very costly mistakes we don't want to get ourselves involved into, and make sure as procurement we level up and we lift our game, and we provide our A game. Right, thanks guys for listening today. It was such an honor. Please do like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Please guys, support a sister. Let's grow our network. Let's grow, and tell other people that there is Lerato in the game, talking procurement, empowering, and giving you knowledge. Can I tell you something, ne? If you sit down and look into the historical videos, I'm telling you, you'll get a lot of information that can help you and your organization and your stakeholders make impactful change. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Until we chat again next time, have a beautiful day. Cheers.